Equity is the number one killer of small business, not collateral, not credit. Equity is the number one killer of small business.
Red flag. The guy is like absolutely unwilling to give even a little bit of a seller note. What the hell is wrong with that business? What is he hiding? What is inside of that dirty laundry that he hasn't told you about? When all is said and done, I think that's part of the problem. Everyone thinks this is just a margin game. I'm going to go in, I'm going to buy a business, and I'm going to make $500,000 instead of working my day job as a tech guy making $150,000 a year. The likelihood of that happening is pretty slim. In fact, you're trading a job for a job, and maybe a more brutal job that doesn't ever shut off, right, when you go to buy a business.
It's a buyer's market, but it's also going to be a come to the table with cash. And if you don't have cash, you can't be buying a business. I think those days are over, man. All right, welcome back to Lords of Lending. I am Stephanie Dunn, your fellow Lord, and with me we have Shane Pearson, Brian Congelari, and here on Lords of Lending today we're going to get real. 2025 was the year of volume. Yay, right? Let's get America back to work. 26 is the year of discipline. And my tagline for this year, guys, is ownership isn't deserved, it's earned. For years, access to capital has expanded. Credit boxes have stretched. Structures have gotten creative. Deals were thin. That was the name of the game, right? 100% financing. Or how could I buy a business with as little down and use as little cash as possible? And owners believed that ownership was easy. And there was no skin in the game. How many times have we heard that skin in the game term? And the sales guy rolls their eye, right? What we're seeing right now is it a correction? And people probably don't want to hear that, but we're seeing corrections right now. And we're going to see thin deals going away. So today I want to talk about equity injection, what that really means. We're going to have some real talk just with the Lords here. And then I want to bring in an industry expert, guys. This guy's the OG of OGs because he was the deputy director of the SBA and he ran liquidations and when deals go bad. So we're going to bring him in on the next episode. But for right now, let's just talk about equity injection, thin deals, cap stacks, what that means, seller notes, like all the creative stuff we've seen. Is it good? Is it bad? It was the way we got deals done for years and years and years. So Shane, what are you seeing in 2026? Is it different or the same as 25 and prior, where thin deals are the name of the game and people don't want to use cash or don't have cash?
So I look at 2025 as kind of like the black card that you're out to dinner with your friends, and there's that one guy who is the borrower in this situation that's just like, just put it on the black card, right? Like just an unending, a complete open balance type of a card. Just go put it on there. Or 2026 is more like you go to the friend that says, you know what, how are we going to pay this back, right? Like this. There's limits now. There's caps to that card. You're not going and dropping 100 grand on XYZ. You have to actually show me how the hell that money comes back when all is said and done and how you're going to actually take care of that debt. So I think that we're coming up on this idea with where regulation changes across the board and with banks starting to hurt. I think it really opens the door for a lot more limits to continue to fall into place. I mean, we've seen some big ones that have made a lot of noise in the market recently that many people don't agree with. We won't get into too much of that or the politics of it, but I think that those every single move has some strategy to try to harness over borrowing and people taking advantage of what the SBA program is in particular, but even just an over leveraged market in general.
Yeah. Brian, what about you? Like, what do you think in your mind when a borrower comes to you? What is a fair equity injection? I used to be the believer of 20%, but now now I just follow the rules, right? 5%. I don't know. What do you think is responsible?
What do I think is responsible? That's a loaded question. Um, I would say if I'm a
Yay.
business owner, and we all know that I can pontificate here on
Big word.
answers to questions, but
Good one. That was a great
I
word.
think it really comes down to so often with SBA, we're doing a balancing act, right? We're looking at a deal and we're saying, okay, how's the cash flow? How's um, the EBITDA of the business, how's the borrower's experience, what's their injection look like, how much cash do they have, how much reserves do they have, how much are we giving them in working capital. So I think how much is appropriate, how much is fair, it really comes down to all of those factors going into the deal and figuring out, okay, do you have 2, 3, 6 months of runway in reserves or in working capital or that you're actually foreseeably going to get? So often we get business plans and it's like, oh, I'm going to make all this money, starting in month 2. And our job so often is, okay, well, spell that out for me. Show me how you're going to do that. And the majority of borrowers have zero clue, right? And the ones that do have a clue, they can rattle it off the top of their head. And so those kind of borrowers, I'm not quite as concerned. What's fair for them? It might be a little bit less than the borrower that comes in and goes, yeah, well, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to open the doors and it's just going to happen. And I look at those people and say, well, okay, well, then we probably want a little more collateral. We probably want a little bit more injection out of this person, better experience, and things to offset our risk. One of the things that Shane just mentioned was how the SBA is now coming out with things that they're dialing things back. So much of what was done in previous years is now kind of being pulled back, and it's all because of what you're saying, Steph. 2026 it's kind of a tightening, but it's more so like, hey, we're getting back to basics here.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, what you just walked through, the balancing act, in listening to you, immediately in the back of my mind, I was like, you know what though? And this has always been my fight with credit. Guess what? More collateral is not going to pay us back, right? So we could take all the collateral we want on his second and third positions on the guy's home. That's not going to help us, man. If the guy can't pay the mortgage, we're SOL. So I think now, guys, equity is the number one killer of small business. Not collateral, not, not collateral, not credit. Equity is the number one killer of small business. The more research I've been doing now, you know, talking about this topic. I just did a webinar yesterday with the SBA with Coleman Report talking about equity injection. It's back, and it's back for a reason, because cash is gone. This is what we talked about last episode too. Everybody's used up their cash, over leveraged, and you hit a snag and you can't pay your mortgage for a month, 2 months, and you fall behind. It is so hard to catch up when you're 2, 3 months behind, man.
Well, I've got a fun story for you. So a couple months ago, we closed a transaction just recently here, and poor borrower. We're trying to figure this one out still. But the guy took over the business and didn't plan for something. And here's a perfect example why this kind of stuff matters. It wasn't so much that I wouldn't even call it an equity play stuff, but it's one of the other topics that maybe we'll get into. And Brian mentioned is liquidity. So we even built in a hell of a bullet to help the guy post close, almost 75 days worth of working capital based off the business's historical needs. We look at their tax returns and stuff. We pump out, okay, this guy needs 100 grand a month to be able to survive. So like we put that number on the table for the guy, helped him out. But here's something he didn't plan for. The seller was kind of a-hole to some of his customers. And so when they transferred, some of those customers kind of looked at it as a way to get the hell out of there, right? They didn't want to work with the business anymore. That's not something that's easily auditable. Most sellers won't give you the key to go talk to the customers that they had if you're going to buy a business. So this guy is kind of struggling because some of these guys had kind of decided they wanted to walk off, and it wasn't a contractual based, like customer base that would lock anybody in. So he's having to go resell himself and do the dance to try to keep these customers on board, and has run into really quick cash strapped. Like, still has full overhead and everything else, and is coming back asking for money, which is scarier than crap for a lender like us to get a call from a borrower or a business owner that is already, a couple months into this and needing more cash to try to survive it. Has a plan, has a thought and idea, but that happens. I think that happens more often than not. And equity play, how much skin in the game helps. That's the anchor that keeps them to stay awake at night and figure out a response. The crap, I have way too much into this. But then the other side is just planning for when stuff is going to inevitably happen. And I think, Steph, some of the other elements of things that you and I and Brian have been texting about what we should even get into here was that idea, the 10% test. You know, that idea that plan for 10% less revenue in when you're taking over, just from the transitionary period. This idea that the exponential growth is going to continue the moment you take over that business. Eh, sure, maybe it'll happen, but don't plan for that. Plan for the opposite and hedge and, like, mitigate, right? So, I think that you wanna know what disciplined underwriting is. It's us looking at that from that perspective. You're not gonna make the same amount of revenue day one, and we kinda benchmark that when we run numbers on a business. When somebody comes to us, it's like, "We wanna give you enough buffer in cash flow, 1.5 times. If you're earning 100 grand, or if our debt's 100 grand, I want 150,000 coming out of that business." I think that's kind of a good mentality of what is the bottom line to help keep yourself alive.
Okay, I was gonna ask you, that was my next question. All right, so here's the deal. If the deal's so thin, right? We're doing it's 95% leveraged, okay? Because he has a seller note for 5 and he only put 5% down. 95% leveraged. So the guy doesn't have any post-close liquidity, let's just say, or a little bit of working capital. Let's say we were good SBA citizens and we gave him 3 months working capital, right? Got it. And you get a dip in sales during the transition. What is a good stress test? Again, guys, we're doing deals right now with 1.15 debt service coverage because that's the SOP. At a 1.15 debt service coverage and 95% leveraged, I mean, it's tight.
That's too thin. It's too thin. The question that I had when Shane was talking was, uh, is there a way to get around that? Is there a way to mitigate or to kind of hedge your bets a little bit against that type of a scenario?
Don't tell me
I
you're gonna
see.
give me another building.
No, 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 no. What I'm gonna say is you talked about having a seller note on the deal. Is there a way to structure it so that you can hold the seller's feet to the fire a little bit more? So the seller doesn't do what Shane's talking about, where
Well,
they
that's what
burn
credit
the
tries
business
to do.
down in the last couple of months because they know, "Oh, I'm selling the business. I don't really care, whatever." You know,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna take care of the business, not gonna take care of the borrowers or the customers. And then the borrower walks in, the buyer, day 1, and oops, 4 customers, big accounts. They're adios, they're out of here.
Guys, we all know the way to increase debt service coverage is decrease the amount you're borrowing. Like,
Yeah,
so it's back to the equity, back to rule number 1, right? So now again, I'm starting to believe, man, I mean, and this is gonna be terrible for the industry. I'm starting to get back to, you wanna buy a house? It's 20% down. Remember, that was the rule, man, in the old days. You wanna buy a business? It's 20% down. Like,
Mhm.
cash injection. Borrow 80%. You should be 80% leverage, not, 95. You know, because then your cash flow is too tight.
One trick
well,
that I had noticed was
go ahead, Brian.
one trick I saw a guy do on several transactions, because I've done several loans for the same guy, and he would set up seller notes that were tied to performance of the business. And so if the debt coverage ratio, which is what we calculate, so it's basically EBITDA, um, against the payment of the new loan. And so if that debt coverage ratio doesn't hit a certain target, then he doesn't have to pay the seller note for that year, for that month, or whatever it is. And so I thought that was a really clever way because he was fairly leveraged on transactions, at least 90%. Um, but he would always come in with the seller note, making up a big chunk, 20, 30% of the overall transaction. And he would tie that to the performance of the business. And then if the business doesn't perform, like Shane's saying, all of a sudden he's got a way out. He's got a 20%, 30% haircut on the transaction that he can implement, because if the seller sucked or whatever it was, now he's got a little bit of a way out, at least temporarily. until the business can either turn around or that seller is just going to take a permanent haircut.
Well, it's funny, you're talking about business acquisitions. Obviously, that's the hot button for all of us. It's last year, I think we saw in the statistics that the amount of business acquisitions was 1 out of 5 SBA loans, right, Steph? I think,
Crazy
you had
like
sent me
that.
something on Bloomberg data or whatever. So the volume of SBA acquisitions is becoming a heavy target, and we've talked about it in previous episodes for SBA lenders in general. It comes with so much risk, so much transitionary risk. I gave you one example. Brian's given you some examples on like how you structure a seller carry note to try to mitigate some of that as well. Maybe to solve the problem of what happened to my other borrower, because I don't think we had a seller note. There's problem number one. So shame on us for not maybe pushing on that a little bit more aggressively. Like red flag, the guy is like absolutely unwilling to give even a little bit of a seller note. What the hell is wrong with that business? What is he hiding? What is inside of that dirty laundry that he hasn't told you about? That's going to create a then going to put that equity that Stephanie's saying we need to put into this at risk. Think of it like an investment. Think of it like your freaking legacy when all is said and done. I think that's part of the problem. Everyone thinks this is just a margin game. I'm going to go in, I'm going to buy a business, and I'm going to make 500,000 instead of working my day job as a tech guy making 150,000 a year. The likelihood of that happening is pretty slim. In fact, you're trading a job for a job, and maybe a more brutal job that doesn't ever shut off. Right when you go to buy a business, so if you're going to invest in your life and invest in that way, you've got to think more strategically before just shoving down the line of I want to be my own boss, taking over a business and putting your 401k on the line and your family's house and everything else, thinking that you're going to have this glorious sunshine, happy go lucky day, and then think the SBA lenders got your back at every corner. We just want to get paid back when all is said and done. We want our loan to be paid back. We're going to try to protect ourselves, number one, and then at least the credit team is going to try to protect ourselves, number one. The sales guys are going to try to think of a more balanced approach to help you get there. And we're a partner in it, a heavy partner in it. But when all is said and done, we're not running the business day to day. So we need you as a partner to think about how the hell this thing pans out as a legacy for yourself, for your family, and for something that will really inevitably change your life. And that requires a lot more careful crafting, seeking out experts. Guys, Brian he's an attorney and he talks like attorney, and sometimes we fall asleep when he starts talking and uses big words. What was that big word we used? I don't know.
No idea.
I'm slinging
Pontification
hard,
or
man,
something?
slinging hard.
I think I read
But
that off ChatGPT.
it was ChatGPT. I've definitely followed it. But I think the idea is you can use you can use us, and we've got a good strategy team even to come in and talk and brainstorm out what am I not thinking of? What am I not preparing for? What am I not mitigating? And whether it's these podcasts or some of the articles we put out online or just giving us a call, I think we can talk through some of the ugly and come up with more creative ways to go to market and maybe try to identify where those holes are that you're going to jump into. Because heavens knows, everyone's going to hit a pothole. And you just hope to hell it doesn't happen in the first 3 months, but count on 7 of them. And I think if you're prepped that way, you're not putting your equity at risk that we're trying to gripe for and saying that needs to happen in 2026.
And there you have it, guys. The Lords have spoken. I'm going to tell you that 2025 was the seller's market. My prediction, and I fully expect this to be the case, 26 is a buyer's market, but that doesn't mean buyers are going to be undisciplined. It's the year of discipline, and it's the year of earning business, not just being able to walk into a business and be 95% leverage. And you're right, putting their entire lives on the line for a business with no equity. So I would say this in closing, it's a buyer's market, but it's also going to be a come to the table with cash. And if you don't have cash, you can't be buying a business. I think those days are over, man. Those days are over. And it's the same with anything. You shouldn't buy anything if you don't have 20% in cash. I think we're going to make that the comeback. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. Follow, like, subscribe, Lords of Lending. And then next episode, we're going to bring in the OG of OGs to talk about how bad and ugly it gets if you don't do it right. So thanks for tuning in.
See you later. Brian, say something.
Peace.